Hello there. As is now customary, the full plot breakdown of Avatar 2: The Last Smurfbender will follow on my main channel in due course. Here, though, is the mini review. It's shit. Okay, well, maybe not quite that mini. Ordinarily, I'd attempt to keep spoilers at a minimum for these shorter entries, but The Way of Water is a curious beast. It's next to impossible to actually spoil the plot, and not just because it's already rotten. No, it's next to impossible to spoil because you already know what it is. The first Avatar was famously Dances with Wolves repackaged for people with no taste. The point of the first Avatar film was not to tell a story, it was to wow you with its visuals. It was, as I will explain in much greater length in the main video, one of the feelies from Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Morally and spiritually empty, no story worth telling and no interest in telling it, not interested in meaning or purpose, nor particularly in evoking emotions in its audience. It was designed to wow the senses, to blow you away, to leave you in awe. This, I maintain, is not cinema, or rather, if it is cinema, then something has gone very badly wrong with the art form. But if the story of the first film was a shamelessly lazy rehash of a far superior forebear, then Avatar: The Way of Water is worse even than that, because this plot is, in all important respects, a rehash of the first film, making it a rehash of a rehash. I don't know that I've ever seen a film more proudly derivative than this. In the first film, Jake Sully has to leave his people to join a tribe of Smurfs, which initially rejects him until he earns acceptance. He has to learn their ways, how to move, how to fly, how to connect with his new surroundings. His people, the people he's left, are evil colonizers, intent on extracting the natural resources of Pandora for their own material gain, and they care not what they destroy in the process. They're after the impossibly valuable material known as unobtainium, a deposit of which exists beneath a tree that is sacred to the Smurfs. The most proximate villain is, essentially, Chip Hazard from Small Soldiers, a competent killer who ends up in a grudge match of sorts with Sully. In a climactic final battle, Chip Hazard is defeated, and Sully Smurf lives on with the Smurfs forevermore. In the second film, in Avatar: The Way of Water, all of that happens again. The difference is purely superficial. Whereas before, all of this took place in a jungle, now it takes place in the sea. Sully Smurf has to leave his people, this time it's the Jungle Smurfs, to join the Sea Smurfs. They initially reject him until he earns acceptance. He has to learn their ways, again, how to swim, how to fly. The difference here is that it's on fish rather than on pterodactyls. He has to learn again how to connect with his new surroundings, which are aquatic as opposed to tropical. His people now are the Smurfs rather than the colonizers, but he still has to leave them because the evil colonizers have arrived, again, intent on extracting the natural resources of Pandora for their own material gain, again, and they care not what they destroy in the process. This time they're after an impossibly valuable material, but it's brain goo of whales that has the power to stop human aging. Deposits of it exist in every whale, and the whales are sacred to the Sea Smurfs. There is also a sacred tree. This one, though, this one's underwater. The most proximate villain is, again, Chip Hazard from Small Soldiers, only this time, he is a Smurf. He's a competent killer who ends up in a grudge match of sorts with Sully. In a climactic battle, he is defeated, and Sully Smurf lives on with the Sea Smurfs forevermore. Now, I think I should add that there are, at least theoretically, some incredibly important variations in the setup. It's not all one-to-one the same. The human aging thing is, of course, one of them. The other one is that, previously, the evil colonizers arrived purely because they were capitalists, and the moral message was that safe and fashionable one, all hyper-capitalistic studios like to spread to boost their credentials among idiots. Capitalism abuses the environment, we must save the trees. But the environmentalist movement has moved on in the 13 years since the first film came out, and it's only become more unhinged. This is reflected in the stakes of Avatar: The Way of Water. No longer are the evil colonizers mere capitalists who want to destroy Pandora in their quest for resources. Now they're here and destroying Pandora in their quest for resources because the Earth is dying, and so Pandora has been identified as a second home for humanity. Now, I said that these were theoretically incredibly important variations in the setup. I should rather have said that they are supposed to be very important. In fact, they are not, because nothing is made of them. They don't actually impact the plot in any way. They are mentioned once each across the entire film, and that's it. Absolutely none of the hugely significant questions invited by "our home is dying" and "we can stop human aging" are ever asked. The film doesn't invite us to consider them. None of the characters consider them. They just that's just it. That is the setup. It doesn't impact the story, it's just taken as given, and then we move on. It's a thoroughly bizarre decision. Normally, if your premise was the Earth is dying, so we need to move to this new planet to save humanity, you would expect the film to be at least partially about that. But this film, no, it's just mentioned and then dropped, likewise human aging. Instead, the film is just concerned with repeating every major beat from the original film. The difference then between the two films is entirely superficial because, once again, the goal is just to wow you, to dazzle you, it is not to tell a story. If you're solely concerned with visuals, then you probably do think you can get away with doing the same thing again and just setting it somewhere else. Learning to fly a pterodactyl in the jungle becomes learning to fly a fish above the ocean. Worshipping a spirit tree in the forest becomes worshipping a spirit tree underwater. Proving yourself to tropical smurfs becomes proving yourself to oceanic smurfs. Remember when everything was green? Well, now everything is blue. And that is basically the difference. Whole tracts of its more than 3-hour runtime are essentially just a screensaver, aquarium footage set to aquarium music, like a computer-generated variant of David Attenborough's Blue Planet, or the soothing visuals dentists play on their TVs in a futile bid to distract you from the fact that they are drilling into your skull. Yes, it all looks very pretty, but the law of entropy is universal. Diminishing returns are a rule of reality. The Way of Water's visuals are indeed stunning, for a while, but sweeping vista after sweeping vista, sparkly flower after sparkly flower, swimming sequence after swimming sequence quickly loses its sheen. You go from watching wondrously wide-eyed to watching with your eyes half closed and your brain wandering off. And it just goes on, and on, and on, and on and on, and on, and it's still going on, into 3 hours, it's still going. Sully Smurf has a family in this film, and much of the middle act follows them to no effect, really, whatsoever. None of them actually is given a character. The second hour is devoted to a weird Californian teenage angst story, where all the Smurfs are surfer dudes who call each other bro all the goddamn time. The younger brother Smurf becomes something of a hinge in the story because he decides he's an emo, and that the world hates him. His only friend is an outcast whale. I'm not making this up. His isolation, which is based on a feeling he has no reason to hold because the film doesn't think it worth doing the character work to justify it, is what sets up the big final battle, or rather it's part of what sets up the big final battle. There are about 15,000 different contrivances that go into it, some of which are bafflingly absurd, all of which are torn to shreds in my main video, which is now comfortably over 32,000 words long. Tragedy befalls the Smurf fam as a result of emo Smurf boy going off on his own. Yet it's not really felt as a tragedy because the person killed has been given less character work than the very little character work behind most of the important characters. The film deploys every amateurish trick in the book in its attempt to make you feel something, anything for the things you're seeing on the screen. You know you're supposed to be sad because it's raining now. You know something sinister is happening because the sun sets red. You know that hope has been restored because the sun rises again. In the event, though, the only time you ever feel anything approaching strong emotions for what occurs on the screen is during a prolonged whale hunt sequence. The death of a whale you've never met is more impactful than the death of a character you have. You've otherwise been thoroughly anesthetized by 3 hours of vaguely pleasant screensaver set to the tinklings of a soundtrack which is about as imaginative as the film it augments, which is to say, not imaginative at all. If this all sounds quite polite and civil for a bad review, and this, I have to say, is probably one of my least favourite films in existence, shortly after the first Avatar film, which probably is my least favourite film in existence, well, it's only because I'm keeping my powder as dry as possible for that main video. This is, though, an abysmal film in almost all respects. Even the action sequences, which some have heralded, and which are supposed to be the thing James Cameron can be relied upon to orchestrate, are either tedious or absurd. At one point, Chip Hazard has Sully Smurf clear in the sights of several rifles. He's sitting there, out in the open, having a chat. Chip's entire mission is to kill Sully Smurf, and yet, for absolutely no reason at all, he actually stops his men from taking the shot in order to bait Sully Smurf onto a whaling ship alone, for no adequately explained reason. Needless to say, it doesn't work on any level. It doesn't work in-universe because it creates the opportunity for things to go oh so predictably wrong, and it doesn't work out-universe because there is no reason for this action. Cameron wrote his way to a finale in which the villain had to win, and could only lose if he made the worst possible decision at the worst possible moment. And James Cameron couldn't even be bothered to apply the veneer of reason to that worst possible decision. The plot required it, so it happened, and we're just supposed to accept it. It's not the only such example. The mere existence of Chip Hazard is also absurd. You'll recall that he was very much dead after the first film. In this film, though, we learned that he cloned himself as a Smurf before going out on the fateful mission that got him killed in that first film. He programmed the clone with his memories, he left a handy little video log explaining all of this to the audience, and then he set his Smurf clone the task of getting payback against Sully Smurf, who hadn't killed him at the time the video was recorded. I mean, this is actually laugh-out-loud level writing. It's baffling how anybody could have seen that script and said, yeah, that'll do. I've met children with a greater awareness of the absurd than this. And if that wasn't quite enough, one of the new characters we were introduced to, Spider, transpires to be Chip Hazard's son, who you can tell didn't exist in the first film because he didn't exist in the first film. Yet according to this film, he was born at the time. The Way of Water's big theme is family, which you'll know very quickly because it hammers it home harder than Vin Diesel on the set of Fast and Furious 36. It has, inexplicably, earned some praise for this theme from the same quarters who would have happily and rightly ridiculed but-ma themes as a defense for, say, The Last Jedi. I thought we'd established that themes alone do not a good film make. You do also need the basics to be in place, like writing that wouldn't shame a team of monkeys. This theme is never more poorly served than in the case of Spider. Spider was adopted by Sully Smurf's fam when he was a baby and has grown up with them. He has no memory of his real father, but he is fixed in his mind as a very evil dude. Yet the minute Chip Hazard's Smurf clone turns up and kidnaps him and demands that he lead the evil colonizers to the Smurfs with whom Spider grew up in order that he can kill them, Spider begins forming a perfunctory father-son bond with the guy. The film gives Spider no actual moral character or belief set, which allows him to be present for a wide variety of scenes that should elicit very definite and contradictory actions and emotions from him, only for him to serve as a vacant plot tool into which the writers can plug whatever emotional response they want to elicit from the audience. He hates the mere thought of his father until the film wants to stress the family point, then he banters with him and helps him out and develops a relationship with him. Then the film wants to stress how evil he is again, so Spider turns against him and complains that he's being mean to the Smurfs. Then the film wants to stress family again, so he's back to helping him out. And in any intervening step where there's nothing for him to do, he's just there. He's a prisoner, he's an enemy, but he's left unguarded and unrestrained. At one stage, he attacks the colonizers and sabotages their entire operation in an action that leads to their complete and eventual demise, only for him in the next scene to be shown wandering around unrestrained again and bantering with them as though nothing had happened. It's bafflingly bad writing. The climax of the film only recapitulates this absurdity. Having turned against the colonizers and Chip Hazard again, Spider finds himself in the ideal position to end a standoff between Chip and Sully. But rather than make any use of his advantageous position, he just walks out like a Wally and appeals to Chip's non-existent moral character. And then, later on, he saves his life. All of this without so much as the basics of supporting character work behind it. In short, and wherever the film isn't purely derivative, replaying entire scenes and plot points from the original film, sometimes several times over, such as when we get to watch different groups of people learning to fly in an exact beat-for-beat reenactment of the learning to fly sequence from the first film, well, when it's not doing that, it finds recourse to the most ridiculously bad writing I have seen in a good long while. And I review shit media for a living. We're used to this kind of thing from the MCU, but it's tolerably well understood that part of the reason for this is mechanical. The MCU has to churn out so much so quickly that it doesn't afford itself time for things like basic plot structure and character writing and proofreading its scripts. Avatar: The Way of Water has no such excuse though. James Cameron has had 13 years in which to work on this film. There's no justification for a story emerging from that development time in the mess this script is in. None at all, save for the unforgivable ones. Here is the passion project of a big-name director with a big ego given a blank check to indulge in the worst of his fetishes. The story sucks because he was never particularly interested in it. It added nothing to the culture the first time and had nothing to draw on the second time around. The world it depicts is beautiful and entirely hollow. The film as a whole suffers from the most extreme case of bloat you are likely to see outside a fat pride seminar. James Cameron has, once again, doubled down on the idea that you can get away with anything in your script so long as you make it look pretty. It's been 13 years since I last saw a film so morally, spiritually and artistically bankrupt that it deserved to be placed on the top of any bonfire of the vanities. Not coincidentally, the last time that happened, it was indeed James Cameron at the head of the first Avatar film. In short, Avatar: The Way of Water is disastrously bad. That the first film remains the highest grossing movie of all time is a lingering stain on our culture and our society. It should never have been. A flop the second time around cannot take away Cameron's entirely undeserved accolades for that film, but it would go some way toward providing a redress. It might even signify something positive about the audience waking up to the criminally low standards of modern cinema. The Way of Water is as empty as its forebear, and Cameron finds himself heading a zombie franchise that no one will look back on in decades to come with 1 ounce of the fondness of the truly great stories to grace the pages of cinematic history, because he was never interested in telling a story to begin with. If he gets what he deserves, nobody will look back on it at all. Oh, and Merry Christmas, I guess?